Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Blindside Fresno. My name is Darcy Elliott and I will be your host today. We are here today talking with Lisa Presley-Thomas, and we're going to be talking today what it's like to be the child of blind parents. And both of Lisa's parents are partially sighted, partially blind, and she's going to tell us more about that and what that experience is like. And we're just going to learn a little bit about that experience and go from there. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And we know each other outside of this program.
Yes, we do.
Right. So I guess probably the easiest thing to do is to start with what was your childhood situation growing up?
Well, both of my parents are visually impaired. They have been all my life. My mother has been blind since birth, and my father's been blind since he was about 9 or 10 from an accident.
Okay.
So having blind parents is pretty much all I've ever known. I don't know what it's like to have so-called normal parents. In my life, being blind, being around blind people is normal.
Okay. And obviously that's very different than most children's experience. Right?
Correct.
So we were talking earlier about how it's hard to say what is quote unquote normal for you because this has always been your situation. But the reason that we bring it up is because sometimes we have heard, I guess you'd call them ignorant people, say blind people shouldn't have children, it's unfair to the child, it's robbing them of their childhood. And what would you say to people who
Well,
made that
obviously,
comment?
those are definitely ignorant people. Having a child, whether you're, 100% normal, disabled, blind, whatever the case may be, I don't think that any individual should limit themselves from having children because of a disability. I think people who have that mindset obviously don't know anything about being disabled or blind or having something wrong with them. I would honestly say that people who think that way are pretty close-minded. I don't think that my childhood or growing up was any different than anybody else. I obviously don't know what it's like to grow up in a household that parents are not disabled or blind. But I don't think that my childhood or my upbringing was any different. I actually think that maybe I could have had advantages growing up because we had to do things a little bit differently. We didn't live a normal life like most children did. I think that we had to be more independent. We had to be more proactive. We had to be more helppful around the house. And I think that has helped me become the adult and the woman that I am today.
Yeah, and it's an excellent point that you bring up because we were discussing earlier about what were the advantages and disadvantages. And I teach a lot of kids, and they have quote unquote normal family situations, but you don't know what goes on at home. So this would just be something that other people can see, maybe as a way of life, like they could see your family or your parents were low vision, because they used a cane or whatever. So we had talked earlier about what it meant to be more independent as a child as opposed to some of children today and the expectations for them. Can you give us some examples of what you mean by that?
Well, I remember when I was probably about 5 years old and we would go grocery shopping. We couldn't just hop in the car and go to the grocery store and then come home. It was a little bit of a process. We had to either walk to the grocery store or catch the bus or a cab. And when we would go to the store, I'd have to write the check to pay for the groceries. And so being 5 years old, I could barely even reach the counter. And I clearly remember that the checkout ladies would always kind of stare at me because here's this 5-year-old little girl that can't even reach the counter writing a check. And then I would, hand it over and show my mom where to sign, put her finger on the line for her to sign. And they would always just kind of look at us like, what's wrong with these people? And to us, it was completely normal.
Didn't everybody write checks when they were
Yeah,
five?
5 years old, of course. Yeah. So, and I clearly remember that being, I guess, to some people very odd, but to us it was very normal.
But I mean, in terms of an advantage, do you think it gave you more skills like in school and math? I mean, what people probably don't know about you right now is that you are an accountant.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I find that very interesting that
Yes.
you were in charge of some of the money and the math and the bills and stuff at home, and you're an accountant now.
I do obviously think that the career path I took as an adult had a lot to do with my childhood and having to learn those skills so early. I know that when I was in school, math was always a subject that I enjoyed and was good at. And then I think that having to write checks, balance checkbooks, help my parents with the financial part of life really did help me build up to know what I wanted to do when I became an adult, because I've always wanted to work with numbers. And so I've been in the accounting field for probably over about 22 years now.
See, I find that slightly amusing because there are many adults who couldn't balance a checkbook or
Right.
know how to pay bills now without doing it online or just with the click of a mouse. And so in a way that was kind of a benefit for you, in
Yes.
my view, and not really. And now, did you ever try to get away with anything, or because your parents couldn't
Well,
see?
you
or?
know, I know that I tried. I tried to sneak out of the house a few times as a teenager. That usually never worked because a lot of people don't know that when you lose one sense, you gain perception at a higher level in your other senses. So although my parents couldn't see, they could hear really well. So they relied on their hearing to know what we were doing, where we were at, what we were getting into. So trying to sneak out of the house never really worked too well because they always heard us and I always got caught.
Yes.
I know that a funny story that my mom always tells everyone is, to this day, I cannot stand cherries. I hate cherries. If there's a cherry in my drink, on my plate, I won't eat it. And when I was about 2 years old, my mother would buy the maraschino cherries in a jar.
All right.
And give them to me as a treat if I was good.
Okay.
And I guess that there was a time where she couldn't hear me and didn't know what I was doing. So she came out looking for me, and I was in the kitchen and had eaten the whole jar of maraschino cherries and got extremely sick.
Yes.
So that
So
is
no
a
more
good
cherries.
No more cherries. No, don't do cherries anymore. But she relied on her hearing. She wasn't hearing anything that I was doing, and so she knew that something was going on. So
that I had a similar experience with peanut brittle one Christmas. So, and my parents see just fine. So
yeah,
and then we talked to in a previous episode with some blind mothers, and a lot of the things that they described and what you're describing are the same exact things. What teenager doesn't try to sneak out or go to the party they're not supposed to or hang out where they're not supposed to go.
Yeah.
So that's nothing unusual. One thing I did notice you talking about transportation, and that has come up in almost every episode of people dealing with low vision issues, that if they could change something, it would be the lack of transportation and how everything is more difficult because you have to plan. You can't just get in your car and go to the grocery store. And so how did that impact you? And how is like with your parents now? Did they utilize Uber or they still use the bus or you or how does that?
my parents, they do not use Uber.
Okay.
And everywhere we went to when I was a child was either the bus, the train, or a cab. I recall we took a cab quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Grocery shopping was the main places where we needed to use a cab. I remember, though, as I got older, I would hate taking the bus. I hated taking the train. It was just so much more work. You'd have to walk to the bus stop. And I remember when I was in high school saying, I can't wait to get my driver's license because I'll never, ever catch the bus ever again. And one of the benefits of having disabled children, I don't know if they still do it or not, was back when I was in high school, I was able to get my driver's license at the age of 15.
Okay.
When I was able to drive, I refused to catch a bus, and I don't think, maybe with one or two exceptions, since I've probably been about 18 or 19, I have not rode a bus. But when we were young children, we would take the Greyhound. My parents would have us come to Fresno during the summertime, and we would come visit family. And my parents would put me and my sister on the bus. We were 8, 9, or I was 8 or 9. My sister was probably about 5 or 6. And we'd catch the Greyhound to Fresno from the Bay Area every summertime and come visit. And at that time, I wasn't scared to catch the bus by myself. It didn't really seem like it was an odd experience.
What I'm saying is you're just describing things that are just normal. It's not really, to you, is normal. And
to me, it's completely normal. I don't, a lot of times people ask me, well, what's it like to grow up with blind parents? And I really don't know how to answer that question because I've never grown up with sighted parents. I don't know what it's like to have parents who could see. I've always had blind parents. I've always had to live in that life. My life wasn't any different, in my opinion, than anyone else's.
So you did, you're okay.
Yes, I'm perfectly normal.
As much as any of us
as much as people
are
seem
perfectly
to think
normal.
That growing up with disabled parents could maybe, scar you, or I live a perfectly normal life.
Do you think it's led you to be more empathetic or
Absolutely.
aware of other people and not
Absolutely.
as judgmental, perhaps?
Absolutely. I definitely think that coming from the environment that I came from, that I absolutely have more empathy for the disabled, and especially for blind individuals. I find myself helping more often when I see somebody who is challenged, needing some assistance. I think that definitely I've become a much more responsible, educated adult because I had to come from a different environment. I'm very passionate about the charity work that I do for several organizations here in the Fresno area, that specifically the California Council of the Blind, that I'm the treasurer of, because that's where I came from. My parents have been
very hard.
Thank you very much.
Very hard.
My parents have been CCB members for, probably all my life. So I grew up in that environment. I grew up going to conventions. I grew up sitting in the meetings, playing around with the other kids. So
I think I remember you telling me how you would go and you would babysit everybody's dogs, guide dogs, and walk the dogs, and
we would go to conventions, and me and my sister and a few other kids that would normally go with their parents, we would make quite a bit of money because we'd walk the dogs and we'd help the blind people and lead them to their rooms.
And they'd tip you or whatever?
They would give us a couple $, and so we would come home with a nice little...
So did you think that was fun to go to the conventions and see people you saw year after year?
Yes.
I mean, you didn't think that was, terrible, I have to go be with all these blind people, or...
It was very fun because a lot of times we would, my parents' friends had children our age, and we would only see them if we went to convention.
Okay.
So we would all get together and we would hang out and we would goof around, and what, kids at 10 and 11 wouldn't want to run around a Holiday Inn or a Hilton and goof off and have the swimming pool. And so it was fun for us. It was like a vacation. We helped out where we could. We'd walk the guide dogs and do things like that, but it was always an enjoyable experience, especially as a kid. Now that I'm an adult and I'm involved in that organization, it's kind of a neat experience for me to actually see the other side of it and actually be involved as an adult where, as a kid, we just saw it differently as a time to goof around and play. And now it's business.
Now it's advocacy and issues and legislation, and that affects, and so I think a lot of times people are afraid of blind people. It's like they don't know how to respond, they don't know what to say, they don't
Right.
want to be insensitive, so they kind of, the option they choose is just to ignore the blind person. I mean,
Yeah,
do you ever see that side of it, or?
I do. I do see, you know, when we're out now, you know, people will stare at my mother, or they'll kind of just watch her walk, especially if she has her cane. And
Right.
as an adult now, that kind of really irritates me. And sometimes there are times where I've actually said something. I know that one specific area that always comes up is if me and my parents are somewhere together and we're, who knows, at the bank or filling out paperwork, or even at a restaurant ordering. They'll always look at me to order their food, or they'll look at me to do something, and they'll say,
Yeah.
well, can she do this? Can she do that? Would she like this to eat? And I say, you can ask her, she's right there. I don't really respond to that, because my parents are able-bodied, they can talk, they can walk, they can do their own thing, they can answer their own questions.
And I know your parents a little bit, and they definitely have their own opinions, and
Yes.
they are
Yes.
feisty,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Your dad's quite a character, and
My dad is definitely quite a
your
character.
mom's very into advocacy, I believe, and in
Yes.
legislation and that kind of thing.
I don't
So-
know why it is that, you know, individuals seem to think that because a blind person is with a sighted person, that the sighted person knows all the answers and the sighted person is doing everything for the blind person. You know, just because you're blind or visually impaired, that doesn't mean that they cannot do for themselves. The majority of the time, a blind or visually impaired person does not want assistance. If they want assistance, they will ask. So now that I'm an adult, that is definitely one of the things where I get a little irritated about it, because my parents can do anything that a sighted person can do. In a different way, yes, but they can still do the same thing that a sighted person can do.
Yeah, and I've often, just in dealing with people with low vision, they actually have to be more capable often
Yes.
than a sighted person, because they have to do things in a different way,
Yes.
and the world is not built for them necessarily, so they
Right.
have to make their own accommodations in many ways.
Right.
So that makes them, and as a person maybe who's not used to being around that, they don't get that. They just see it as like, you know, a lot of people will say, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would do if I was, that's the worst thing I
Yeah.
can possibly imagine. And so you're like, well, but it's not the end of life. And obviously
Right.
your parents went on, and you think you just said they were how many years married?
My parents, 46 years married.
46.
Yes.
I mean, that is an achievement, especially, and to deal with all those challenges and still be, and have raised two beautiful
Yes.
children, and now they have grandchildren and great-grandchildren now.
Yes.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
those are all good things. Now, going back to your childhood, for you and your sister, do you feel like you had extra responsibilities around the house, or just normal chores? Like,
You know, we had to do probably a lot more than children of sighted parents. But when it came to actually responsibilities or chores around the house, and it's funny because me and my husband have had this argument several times. As a child, I don't ever recall having to do chores.
okay.
And mainly because if my mother, you know, put me in charge of vacuuming the house or putting away the dishes or doing the dishes, whatever the case may be, if they weren't put in the spot that she would expect them to be, or if I left the vacuum cleaner out in the hallway, that would be a hazard for her,
Right.
or she wouldn't know where things are located at. So I don't ever remember having to do chores, because I think it was more of my mother needed to know exactly where things were in the house. If things were out of place, it could be a hazard for her, especially something that's left out on the floor, left out in the hallway or the living room.
So you're saying she would find it easier just to handle it herself than have
I'm
you guys do
assuming
it?
so, because I don't ever recall ever having to do chores, and I think that I've kind of, it's kind of filtered off of my children. You know, my children never really, although they're all grown now, they never really had a lot of responsibility around the house.
That's interesting.
And I think it's because of the way I was raised. I never
See, I would
had responsibility.
honestly, I would have expected the opposite answer, that you would have had actually, more chores to do and more
Yeah.
things, but
I don't really remember. I mean, obviously we had our,
I'm kind of
our
jealous now
bedrooms.
because I had
Yeah.
definite chores to do every Saturday.
I
was-
know we had, our bedrooms to clean,
Right.
and we had, to pick up after ourselves,
Right.
and we had to be more cautious with things that we left out.
Right.
But I don't really recall ever having to, be assigned certain chores.
Did your mom and dad do all the cooking and all that stuff? Were you in charge of any of that?
My mother primarily did all of the cooking. As I got older, as a teenager, I think, I kind of was able to, fend for myself a little
Right.
bit. But my mother, we were fortunate where my mother was always able to stay home and raise us, which, in today's world, there's not a lot of mothers who were able to do that.
Right.
So I think that was a big benefit. So my mother was usually the one who did the cooking and the cleaning, and so she was a great mom for doing all of that. 'Cause,
Yeah.
most moms, I know me being a mom, we have to get out and work now in the workforce.
Right. And how do you think that affected your schooling and stuff? I mean, were your parents able to help you with your homework, or how did you deal with that issue, or dealing with teachers, like back to school night? Do you remember any problems with that?
I guess maybe that would probably be an advantage, the fact that my parents weren't able to drive to the back to school nights or the parent teacher conferences. So, and most of the time my teachers knew that my parents were
Right.
visually impaired, so we would kind of get a pass on not having our parents have to come to school for those sort of things because they were usually in the evening time. The buses
Right.
may not have been running at that time. So I guess maybe that would definitely be an advantage because we did get away with a lot of stuff for school because my parents could not easily get to the school facility or participate in activities. So
Were you a
think
good
we probably
student?
did. I was a good student. I was a very good student. I know a few times I remember having to sign my parents' name on some forms that came home that, they never knew about.
Now they do.
They do now. But I think that probably, especially when we were school age, that we did get a little bit of a break because we didn't have to have our parents involved so much in school. My father always worked. My father has always worked for the state of California, probably 35 years or so. My mother was usually the one who took care of anything related to the schooling or the shopping or anything of that nature.
So, in all fairness, I did ask before we began to tell some stories about things that she got away with or tried to get away with because her parents were low vision, and she said she wasn't willing to share all her secrets. And so there's probably a few stories we're not hearing that.
Probably a few, yeah.
But that's okay, because she doesn't want her kids to get any bad ideas, or her grandkids right?
No.
Watching this program.
Yeah.
But so like I said, and one of the themes that keeps coming back when we talk to people and from different aspects of the blindness issue is that except for a few challenges, life is normal. It wasn't.
Yes.
From what you're describing, nothing really is that crazy out of the ordinary.
No. To me, life was normal. I don't know what it's like to live a life with sighted parents. My life was absolutely normal. Like I said, things were different, things were altered, but my life was 100% normal. It was normal to be in a room full of blind people. It was normal for my mother to read us bedtime stories her books were in Braille. It was normal for us not to have a lot of lights on in the house. It was normal to have to walk around in the dark. It was normal for us.
Things that we wouldn't consider, but I mean,
Right.
The point is that she was a good mom. She read you stories at bedtime.
Yes.
Yes. And there's a lot of parents who can't be bothered to do that kind of thing, even though they can.
Yeah, I
find that kind of sad.
I can probably say I can maybe count on my hands how many bedtime stories I might have read to my children, but every night my mother would pray with us, and she would read us a bedtime story, and her books were always in Braille. When we would go to church, her Bible was in Braille, and most people, when you take a Bible to church, it's a little Bible. Sometimes it could fit in your purse. My mom's Bible is about 40 books that are probably about 10 by 12 in size. They're very large.
Yes.
And so she did everything a regular mom did, just in different sort of ways.
Yeah. Well, that's very cool. So I guess we'll wrap up our time together by, I guess you just summarizing, if someone were to say to you, blind people shouldn't have children, or it's not fair to the, children, or it would ruin their childhood or scar them, like you said, at the end of the day, what would you say to those people?
I would probably tell them that they can look at me and see that I'm 100% normal, that I have lived a life without any issues, without any handicaps, without anything whatsoever. I now am a productive member of society. I, have a good job. I have a family myself, children, a husband. And I don't think that having parents that are blind would affect any individual from deciding not to have children. I don't think that that should be a factor whatsoever. I think that, things that are odd to individuals who are looking into the world of a blind person, they can't really quite understand or see that our life is completely normal from everybody else's. And so and I know a lot of children of blind individuals, and all of us, I think, are the same as far as our outlook on life. We're more helpful with, certain situations. I think we're more proactive when we see people who need help. We're more willing to say yes to individuals who might need something, because I think we have a little bit more compassion, because we were just raised in a household where we had to, be able to help out more, be more compassionate to individuals.
And I would think that would be definitely something we all need more of, right? More empathy, more compassion.
Absolutely.
More putting ourselves in other people's shoes, kind of, and seeing it from their perspective.
Absolutely.
So it's been great talking to you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, time goes by really quickly when you just are.
That was really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right. So, I'm going to close this out here. So, again, thank you so much for joining us on Blindside Fresno. We hope you have learned a little something today, and we certainly appreciate our guests coming to share with us her personal experiences. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, and you would like to contact the producer, you can do so at blindsidefresno.com or visit our Facebook page. And please feel free to reach out. If you are struggling with low vision issues or blindness issues, you are not alone, and there are a lot of resources that can help you. So again, thank you for joining us on Blindside Fresno, and have a great day, everybody.